Absolutely not, Sarah. I don't care what kind of personal emergency you think you have. The Peterson account presentation is next week, and I need everyone focused and present. Victoria Marshall's voice cut through the air like a knife, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her mahogany desk as she stared me down. I stood my ground, clutching the medical leave request form in my trembling hands. Ms. Marshall, please. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. The patient. She interrupted, her red lips curling into a sneer. You're an account executive, Sarah, not a nurse. Whatever medical drama you're caught up in isn't our concern. This is a marketing firm, not a charity. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I understand that, but this is different. He has no one else, and his condition is deteriorating rapidly. I just need 1 week. Enough. Victoria slammed her hand on the desk, making me jump. I've heard enough of your excuses. You've been distracted for weeks, taking long lunches, leaving early. Now you want a whole week off right before our biggest presentation of the year. The answer is no. I felt my chest tighten. Victoria had always been harsh, but this was different. This was cruel. Ms. Marshall, I've never taken a sick day in 3 years. I've worked every holiday, every weekend you've asked. I'm just asking for this one. 1 week that could cost us millions, she cut in, standing up to her full height. At 5'10" in her designer heels, she towered over me. Do you have any idea what the Peterson account means to this firm? Of course you don't. You're too wrapped up in your little humanitarian project to see the bigger picture. The way she said humanitarian project made it sound like a dirty word. I thought about the man lying in the hospital bed across town, his kind eyes and gentle smile despite the pain he was in. He didn't deserve to die alone just because Victoria Marshall couldn't see past her quarterly projections. I'm taking a week, I said quietly but firmly. I'll work remotely nights, weekends, whatever it takes. But I need to be there for him. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you defying me, Sarah? I'm doing what's right. She laughed, a cold, harsh sound that echoed through her corner office. What's right? Let me tell you what's right. What's right is doing your job. What's right is being a team player. What's right is understanding that in this business, we don't have the luxury of playing Mother Teresa. I stood there, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. I understand if you need to write me up or dock my pay, but I'm taking a week. Victoria walked around her desk slowly, like a predator circling its prey. Oh, I'll do better than that. She picked up my leave request form and tore it in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor. You're fired. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let her see me flinch. You're firing me for requesting medical leave. I'm firing you for insubordination, poor performance, and failure to prioritize company interests. She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. Enjoy unemployment, Sarah. I'm sure your patient will appreciate your sacrifice. I should have felt devastated. 3 years of my life, countless 60-hour weeks, all the missed family events and canceled vacations, all gone in an instant. But standing there in Victoria's office, watching her smug satisfaction, I felt something else entirely, relief. Thank you for making this decision easier, I said, turning to leave. Oh, and Sarah, Victoria called after me. Don't bother asking for a reference. As far as I'm concerned, you never worked here. I walked out of her office with my head held high, ignoring the curious stares of my soon-to-be ex-coworkers. My hands were steady as I packed up my desk, carefully placing my photos and personal items into a cardboard box. Jenny from accounting hurried over, her face full of concern. Sarah, what happened? I heard raised voices. Victoria fired me, I said simply, wrapping my favorite coffee mug in newspaper. What? She can't do that. Not over medical leave. I smiled at Jenny's outrage. She can, and she did. But it's okay, really. And surprisingly, it was. As I walked out of the glass and steel building that had been my professional home for the past 3 years, I felt lighter than I had in months. My career might be in shambles, but I knew I was doing the right thing. The hospital was a 20-minute drive from the office. As I navigated through mid-day traffic, I thought about how I'd ended up here. It had started. Thomas Edwards didn't look like a man worth millions. In his faded hospital gown, with his silver hair thinning and his face gaunt from chemotherapy, he looked like any other patient. But it was his eyes that caught my attention, bright, alert, and filled with a kindness that seemed to defy his circumstances. "The Great Gatsby again," he'd said when I walked in with the book. "Don't you think that's a bit on the nose for a cancer ward?" I laughed, surprised by his humor. "Would you prefer something more upbeat?" I have the bell jar in my back. That had made him laugh too, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile hospital room. We'd spent the next hour talking about literature, life, and everything in between. By the time I left, I knew I'd met someone special. Over the next few weeks, I found myself visiting Thomas more frequently. He told me about his life, how he'd built his investment firm from nothing, how he'd lost his wife to cancer 15 years ago, how his children were scattered across the globe, too busy with their own lives to visit their dying father. "It's my own fault," he'd said without bitterness. "I spent so many years building my empire, I forgot to build relationships. Now look at me, all the money in the world and not a soul to share it with." But that wasn't entirely true anymore, because he had me. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, grabbing my box of belongings from the passenger seat. As I walked through the familiar corridors toward Thomas's room, I thought about Victoria's words, "Enjoy unemployment." She had no idea that some things were worth more than a steady paycheck or a corner office. Thomas was awake when I walked in, his face lighting up despite the obvious pain he was in. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early? Don't you have work?" I set my box down and pulled up my usual chair beside his bed. "Change of plans. Looks like I'll be able to spend more time here after all." He studied my face carefully, his keen intelligence not dulled by illness or medication. "What happened?" "I got fired," I said simply. "My boss didn't appreciate me requesting medical leave to be here with you." "Sarah," his voice was filled with concern. "You shouldn't have done that. Not for me. I'm not worth." "Don't," I interrupted gently. "Don't say you're not worth it. Every human being deserves to have someone by their side during times like this. Besides," I added with a smile, "that job was slowly killing my soul anyway." He chuckled weakly. "Well, when you put it that way," his expression turned serious. "But what will you do now?" I shrugged, trying to appear more confident than I felt. "I'll figure something out. Right now, let's focus on getting your pain levels under control. The nurse mentioned you refused your morning medication." Thomas looked sheepish. "It makes me too groggy. I hate not being able to think clearly. And I hate seeing you in pain," I countered, reaching for the call button. "Let's compromise. Take the medication, and I'll read to you until you fall asleep." I brought a new book. He raised an eyebrow. "Please tell me it's not the bell jar." We both laughed, and for a moment, the weight of everything, my lost job, his illness, the uncertainty of the future, seemed to lift. The nurse came in with Thomas's medication, and I settled in to read, pulling out a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. As I read, watching Thomas slowly relax as the pain medication took effect, I thought about how sometimes the biggest sacrifices lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Victoria Marshall thought she was punishing me, but in reality, she'd given me something priceless, the freedom to be exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would change both our lives forever. The next few days fell into a rhythm. I'd arrive at the hospital early in the morning, armed with books, crossword puzzles, and an endless supply of terrible jokes that somehow always made Thomas smile. We'd talk for hours about his business empire, my dreams of starting my own marketing consultancy, the books we loved, the lives we lived. Between monitoring his medication schedule and coordinating with his medical team, I learned more about Thomas Edwards the man, not just Thomas Edwards the patient. I learned about his first business venture, a failed computer repair shop in the 1980s that taught him more about resilience than any success ever could. I learned about his late wife, Margaret, and how her passion for art had influenced his early investment choices in emerging digital art platforms. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Thomas asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Why did you really give up your job for me, Sarah?" I looked up from the newspaper crossword we'd been working on together. "I told you." "You told me what you thought I needed to hear," he interrupted gently. "But I want the truth." I set the newspaper aside, considering his question. "Do you remember your first week here, when I was reading to the patients?" He nodded. "I read to 17 people that day. 15 have family with them. One had friends visiting. You were the only one alone. I met his eyes. When I asked the nurse about you, she said you'd been here for 3 weeks without a single visitor. It broke my heart. Ah, he said softly. Pity then. No, I said firmly, not pity. Recognition. I recognize something in you that I've always seen in myself. The tendency to give everything to your work, to your goals, until one day you look up and realize you've forgotten to build connections along the way. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You're too young to be so wise, he finally said. And you're too important to be alone, I countered. He smiled, though his eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. Important? I'm just a foolish old man, who built one of the largest investment firms in the country, I finished, who revolutionized ethical investing practices, who created thousands of jobs and changed countless lives. Yeah, I did my research. Google? He asked, amused. LinkedIn, actually. Your profile needs updating, by the way. We both laughed, and the heavy moment passed. But something had shifted between us. A deeper understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits despite our differences in age and circumstances. As the week progressed, Thomas's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about making him comfortable and managing expectations. But Thomas himself remained clear-eyed and determined. Sarah, he said one evening as the hospital settled into its nighttime routine, I need you to do something for me. Anything, I replied, and I meant it. In my briefcase, the one my secretary brought last month, there's a letter. I need you to deliver it for me. I found the briefcase tucked away in his room's small closet, its leather worn but still elegant. Inside was a sealed envelope, addressed simply to Victoria Marshall, CEO, Marshall & Associates Marketing. My heart stopped. Thomas. Yes, he said, watching my reaction carefully. Victoria Marshall, your former boss. Though she doesn't know it, her company's recent success is largely due to my firm's quiet investment and guidance. I stared at the envelope in my hands, my mind racing. You knew? All this time, you knew where I worked. He nodded. I recognized your company ID card that first day. I've been following Marshall & Associates' progress for years. It's one of my more interesting investments. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to get to know you as Sarah, not as an employee of a company I partially own. He shifted in his bed, wincing slightly. And I'm glad I did. It showed me exactly who you are, someone who would give up everything to help a stranger, even when it costs you dearly. I sat down heavily in my chair, the envelope feeling suddenly heavy in my hands. What's in the letter? The truth, he said simply. About investment strategies, about company direction, about leadership. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. About how true success isn't measured in quarterly profits or market share, but in how we treat people. I looked at the envelope, then back at Thomas. When do you want me to deliver it? Tomorrow, he said. I think it's time Victoria Marshall learned a few things about the real costs of success. As I left the hospital that night, the letter safely tucked in my bag, I couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring. Victoria Marshall had tried to break me, thinking she held all the power. But sometimes, life has a way of evening the score, not through revenge or malice, but through simple truth and justice. Little did Victoria know, her world was about to change forever, and I had a front row seat to watch it happen. The next morning, I stood in front of Marshall & Associates' gleaming office building, Thomas's letter clutched in my hand. The same security guard who had wished me good morning every day for 3 years now looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Ms. Collins, but you're not on the approved visitor list anymore. Ms. Marshall's orders. I smiled, pulling out my phone. Could you please call up to Victoria's office? Tell her I have a letter from Thomas Edwards. The guard's eyes widened slightly at the name. Clearly, he recognized it. After a brief call, he handed me a visitor's badge, his expression puzzled. Ms. Marshall will see you immediately. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt surreal. Just a week ago, I'd been rushing up here, juggling presentation materials and coffee, desperately trying to balance my work life with my volunteer commitments. Now, I was calmer than I'd ever been, knowing that what happened next would change everything. Victoria's assistant jumped up when I stepped out of the elevator. Ms. Marshall is waiting for you, she said, hurrying to open the office door. I noticed she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Word of my firing had clearly spread. Victoria sat behind her desk, her posture rigid, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah," she said coolly, "I assume this isn't a misguided attempt to get your job back." I placed Thomas's letter on her desk. "No, Victoria, this is a delivery from Thomas Edwards." She stared at the envelope, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over it. "Thomas Edwards, the investor." "The same." I sat down without being invited, enjoying the flash of annoyance that crossed her face. "He asked me to deliver this personally." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she picked up the envelope. "How do you know Thomas Edwards?" "He's my patient," I said simply. "The one you fired me for helping." The color drained from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter, her eyes scanning the contents rapidly. I watched as her expression shifted from disbelief to horror to something close to panic. This can't be right," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "What's wrong, Victoria? Not the letter you were expecting." She looked up at me, her usual composure completely shattered. "He's pulling his investment. All of it, effective immediately." She shuffled through the papers frantically. "This would ruin us. The Peterson account, the new office expansion, everything. It's all backed by his firm." "I know," I said quietly. "You know." Her voice rose sharply. "You knew about this and you didn't say anything. When exactly should I have mentioned it? While you were firing me, or while you were threatening to blacklist me from the industry?" Victoria stood up abruptly, starting to pace behind her desk. "We have to fix this. You have to help me fix this. Talk to him, explain that it was all a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I interrupted, my voice hardening. "You fired me for trying to help a dying man. You mocked my compassion and treated basic human decency like a character flaw. That wasn't a misunderstanding, Victoria. That was a choice." She stopped pacing, turning to face me. "Please," she said, and I was shocked to hear real desperation in her voice. "I'll give you your job back, a promotion, a raise, whatever you want. Just help me save this." I thought about Thomas, lying in his hospital bed, still thinking of others even as his own time grew short. I thought about all the employees at Marshall and Associates who lived in fear of Victoria's moods and arbitrary decisions. I thought about Jenny from accounting crying in the bathroom after another public humiliation, and Mark from creative who had missed his daughter's recital because Victoria demanded last-minute changes to a presentation. "I don't want my job back," I said finally, "but I will tell you what Thomas told me to say when you made this offer." She leaned forward eagerly. "Yes." "He says you have a choice. You can keep his investment, keep your position, keep everything, but only if you agree to some changes." "What changes?" I pulled out another envelope, this one containing the document Thomas had drafted late last night. Complete restructuring of the company's management style. Implementation of proper work-life balance policies, fair medical leave, regular employee satisfaction surveys with real consequences for poor leadership. "Oh, and," I paused, enjoying the moment, "I'll be overseeing the changes as the new director of employee relations." Victoria's jaw dropped. "You're joking." "Thomas Edwards doesn't joke about business," I said. "You have until the end of the day to decide. Accept these terms or watch everything you've built crumble." She sank into her chair, all pretense of superiority gone. "He's really dying, isn't he?" "Yes," I said softly. "He is, and his last act in business will either be saving this company from its toxic culture or making an example of it. The choice is yours." Victoria stared at the documents for a long moment. Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something like respect in her eyes. "You planned this, didn't you? Getting close to him, telling him about the company?" I shook my head. "No, Victoria. I just showed kindness to someone who needed it. Everything else," I gestured to the letters on her desk, "this was all Thomas. He's been watching this company for years, waiting to see if you'd grow into the kind of leader he could trust. Last week, you showed him exactly who you are." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Victoria picked up a pen, her hand only slightly shaking as she signed the documents. "I assume you'll want your own office." "Corner office," I corrected, "with a view. And I start next week." When I left Victoria's office, the whole floor was eerily quiet. Word would spread soon enough about what had happened, but for now, I savored the peace. I had one more stop to make. Thomas was sleeping when I returned to the hospital, his breathing shallow but steady. I sat in my usual chair, taking his frail hand in mine. "It's done," I said softly. She signed everything. His eyes fluttered open, and a small smile crossed his face. Never doubted she would. Victoria Marshall isn't stupid. Ruthless, maybe, but not stupid. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "For everything." He shook his head slightly. "No, Sarah. Thank you. You showed me that even at the end, it's possible to make a difference, to leave things better than we found them." Over the next few days, I split my time between the hospital and the office, setting up the new policies that would transform Marshall and Associates. Victoria, to her credit, threw herself into the changes with the same intensity she'd once used to terrorize her employees. Maybe she was just protecting her investment, or maybe something had genuinely shifted in her understanding of leadership. Thomas held on long enough to see the first employee satisfaction survey results, smiling weakly as I read him the overwhelmingly positive responses. "See," he whispered. "Sometimes the best investments are in people." He passed away peacefully 3 days later, holding my hand as I read to him from The Great Gatsby, his final joke about inappropriate book choices for a hospital ward. At his memorial service, I was surprised by the number of people who attended. Not just business associates and employees, but people whose lives he had touched in quiet ways. Scholarship recipients, small business owners he'd mentored, charity workers he'd supported anonymously. Victoria was there too, standing quietly at the back, looking thoughtful. A month later, I sat in my new corner office, reviewing applications for our expanded employee assistance program. Jenny from accounting poked her head in, grinning. "You'll never believe what just happened," she said. "Victoria approved all the flexible working requests, all of them, and she smiled while doing it." I laughed, glancing at the photo of Thomas I kept on my desk. "People can surprise you sometimes," I said, "especially when someone shows them a better way." As I looked out over the city skyline, I thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. Victoria had fired me for showing compassion, thinking it was a weakness. Instead, that same compassion had led me to Thomas, who showed us all that true strength lies in how we treat others. The company culture at Marshall and Associates was transforming, slowly but surely. Victoria was learning to balance ambition with empathy, and employees were finally feeling valued and heard. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was progress. Every morning, as I walked into the building, I remembered Thomas's words. Sometimes the best investments are in people. He had invested in me when I was just a volunteer reader, seeing something worth nurturing. Now I was investing in others, creating the kind of workplace where kindness wasn't seen as weakness, and where success was measured not just in profits, but in the lives we touched. Victoria still had her moments of old habits creeping back, but now there was a system in place to check her worst impulses. More importantly, she was beginning to see the benefits of a happier, more loyal workforce. Productivity was up, turnover was down, and our reputation in the industry was soaring. 1 year to the day after Thomas's passing, I received a package from his lawyers. Inside was a letter, written in his familiar shaky handwriting during his final days. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, a year has passed since our paths crossed. I hope by now you've seen the fruits of our little experiment in corporate transformation. But more than that, I hope you've realized something about yourself. You see, when you walked into my hospital room that first day, I didn't just see someone with a kind heart. I saw a leader, someone who understood that true power comes not from authority, but from empathy, someone who could change not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to human capital. That's why I've left you something else. Voting shares in my investment firm. Use them wisely. Look for other companies like Marshall and Associates, businesses with potential held back by toxic leadership. Change them too. You once told me that you gave up your job because you recognized something in me. Well, I recognize something in you too, the future of ethical business leadership. Make me proud. With gratitude and faith, Thomas." I sat in my office for a long time after reading that letter, watching the sun set over the city. In my inbox were dozens of emails from other companies asking about our transformation, wanting to know our secret. On my desk were reports showing record profits alongside unprecedented employee satisfaction scores. Victoria knocked on my door, holding 2 cups of coffee, a peace offering that had become our weekly tradition. "Good news," she said, handing me a cup. "The Peterson account just renewed their contract. They said it's because of our new corporate culture initiatives." I smiled, thinking of that day a year ago when she fired me over this same account. "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" She nodded, looking thoughtful. "You know, I never thanked you properly for what you and Thomas did. You could have destroyed this company, but instead you saved it. Saved me too, if I'm being honest." "Thank Thomas," I said softly. "He believed in the power of second chances." "And third and fourth," Victoria added with a wry smile. "I should know." As she left my office, I looked again at Thomas's letter. "Make me proud," he'd written. But I knew he already was proud, not just of me, but of every person in this building who had embraced change, who had learned to balance profit with compassion, who had discovered that success and kindness weren't mutually exclusive. Tomorrow, I would start looking at other companies, seeking out those who needed the same transformation. But for now, I sat in my corner office, sipping coffee and watching the city lights come alive, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought me to Thomas's hospital room, and for the chain of events that proved sometimes losing everything is the first step to gaining something better. The next morning, as I walked into the building, the security guard who had once apologetically turned me away now greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Miss Collins. Making any lives better today?" I thought about Thomas, about Victoria, about all the changes we'd made and all the changes still to come. "Every day," I replied. "That's what good investments are all about." And somewhere I knew Thomas was smiling.